My name is Tessa Calloway, and it took exactly 90 seconds to erase 10 years of my life. I sat in the glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of Vantage Quill Partners, listening to a man I had hired 3 years ago tell me my career was over. He did not look me in the eye. He just slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany table. It is purely a restructuring decision. "Tessa," he said, his voice flat and rehearsed. "Your position is no longer viable in the current market direction. Effective immediately." I did not scream. I did not beg. I am 34 years old, and I have built my reputation on being the calmest person in the room when the building is on fire. I simply stood up, smoothed the front of my skirt, and walked out. But the real knife in my back was not waiting in that room. It was waiting in the lobby. As I passed the security desk to hand over my badge, my eyes drifted to the bank of surveillance monitors behind the guard. One screen showed the executive lounge. My husband, Graham Whitlock, was standing there. He was surrounded by the senior partners, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch. He was laughing. It was a full-body laugh, the kind he used to save for me. I watched his lips move clearly on the high-definition screen. "Finally, she's back where she belongs," Graham said to the room. The guard looked away, embarrassed, but I just stared. The cold air of the street hit me a moment later, sharp and biting. I pulled my phone from my pocket to call a cab, but the screen went black. A notification popped up, account disabled, then another access revoked. Then a final email arrived from a generic legal address. It was a termination non-disclosure agreement. They wanted me to sign away my right to sue within 48 hours in exchange for a severance package that was insulting. When I got home, the house was silent. I sat in the dark for 2 hours until I heard Graham's key in the lock. He walked in, smelling of expensive cologne and victory. He did not hug me. He did not ask if I was okay. He leaned against the doorframe and loosened his tie, looking at me like I was a broken appliance. "You look terrible, Tessa," he said, shaking his head. "I told you this would happen. You don't have the stamina for my world. Honestly, it is a relief. Now you can focus on things that actually matter." I opened my mouth to speak, but his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smirked. Then my tablet on the coffee table rang. It was a video call request from Celeste, my mother-in-law. I accepted it, and her perfectly made-up face filled the screen. She was smiling, but her eyes were cold, dead stones. "Tessa, darling." She purred. "Graham told me the news. We think it would be best if you took a trip. Disappear for a while, just until the chatter dies down. We must keep the family reputation spotless. You understand? A failed career is so messy." I ended the call without a word. My hands were shaking, not from sadness, but from a rage so pure it felt like ice in my veins. I looked down at my phone. Graham had posted a status update 5 minutes ago. It was vague, poetic, and lethal. Sometimes you have to trim the dead weight to let the ship sail. Sad day when you realize some people just can't keep up with excellence. The comments were already flooding in from our mutual friends, offering him sympathy for having an incompetent wife. I went to the kitchen to pour a glass of water, needing to cool the burning in my throat. That was when I saw it. Lying on the marble island, right where Graham had tossed his mail, was a thick cream envelope. It was stamped in red ink confidential board. I had never received one of these. Despite being a senior strategist, my heart hammered against my ribs as I slid a knife under the flap. Inside, there was a single heavy card. It was a VIP all-access pass for the Vantage Quill Investor Gala. The date was for tomorrow night. The name printed on the card was Graham Whitlock. He had forgotten it. He was so arrogant, so sure of his victory, that he had left the key to his kingdom on my kitchen counter. I looked at the pass. Then I looked at the door where my husband was whistling a happy tune as he changed out of his suit. I did not cry. I raised my phone and took a clear photograph of the document. If they want me silent, I whispered to the empty room, my voice steady and low. I will be silent the right way. 2 years ago, I was not the woman who got fired in 90 seconds. I was the woman Vantage Quill called when they had a problem that no one else could solve. I was the fixer. I did not speak much in meetings because I did not have to. I let my preparation do the screaming. My binders were legendary. My risk assessments were bulletproof. And I believed, with a naive kind of arrogance, that competence was the only currency that mattered. That was how I met Graham. We were on a joint pitch for a failing tech conglomerate. He was magnetic. He knew exactly when to lean in, when to laugh, and when to touch a client's arm. But looking back, I see the pattern I missed then. He only praised me when there was an audience. Tessa is the brains behind this. He would announce to the room, flashing that perfect, practiced smile. But the moment the door closed and we were alone in the elevator, the praise evaporated. He would check his reflection in the metal doors and say nothing. Not a word. Then came the dinner with his mother. Celeste Whitlock sat at the head of a table long enough to land a plane on. She did not ask me if I loved her son. She did not ask about my dreams. So, Tessa, she said, cutting her steak with surgical precision, what exactly do your people do, I mean? Do you have a network or just a job I remember the sting of it? I realized then that the Whitlocks did not care about results. They lived on reputation. They traded on air. I thought I could bridge the gap by working harder. I thought if I made enough money for the firm, they would have to respect me. I was wrong. The shift happened slowly. On the Harrington merger, I spent 3 weeks sleeping 4 hours a night, building the strategy from the ground up. Graham spent those weeks playing golf with the Harrington CEO. When the final presentation deck came back from the design team, I flipped to the credits page. My name was no longer next to his as lead strategist. It was down in the corner, in font size 8, listed under team support. I confronted him that night in our kitchen. It is just optics. Tess, he said, pouring himself a glass of wine and refusing to look at me. The client connects with me. It makes the deal smoother. Besides, we are married. What does it matter whose name is on the slide? It is all our money in the end, isn't it? I did not argue. I did not throw the wine glass. I just felt a cold click in my chest. That night, I did not go to sleep. I went to my laptop. I created a hidden folder. I started saving every email, every draft history, and every timestamp that proved who did the work. At the time, I told myself it was just my professional OCD. I was managing risk. I did not want to admit I was building a case against my own husband, but the final nail came a month later. We were at a charity gala. I had stepped onto the balcony to get away from the noise, and I heard voices around the corner. It was Celeste. She is useful for now. Graham, she was saying, her voice low and dismissive. But do not get attached. She is just a machine. And machines are replaceable when a newer model comes out. I stood there in the shadows, gripping the cold stone railing. I should have walked away then. I should have filed for divorce the next morning. But I convinced myself it was just a cultural difference, that they were just hard people who needed time to warm up. I told myself I was overreacting. Now, sitting in my dark living room with a termination letter in my hand, I realized the truth. That feeling in my gut 2 years ago was not insecurity. It was a warning siren, and I had been fool enough to hit the snooze button. The adrenaline from the hallway had faded, leaving behind a cold, clinical clarity. I sat at my dining table, surrounded by silence, and forced my brain to stop feeling and start processing. This was not a standard layoff. Standard layoffs are clumsy. This was a surgical extraction. My mind replayed the last 3 weeks like a forensic film reel. It started with Project Hush. It was a massive merger deal, the kind that makes careers or ends them. 3 weeks ago, I had flagged a discrepancy in the risk assessment model. The numbers were too clean. Someone had manually overridden the volatility projections to make the deal look safer than it was. I had sent an urgent email to the chief financial officer, expecting a panic meeting. Instead, I got a one-line reply 5 minutes later. It is being handled. Do not worry about it. Tessa. But nobody had handled it. I knew that for a fact. I opened my personal laptop. I could not access the company server anymore, but I had synced my calendar to my personal cloud 2 days ago. I clicked on the icon, expecting to see my schedule for the past month. It was blank. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every meeting I had attended in the last 2 weeks, every strategy session for Project Hush, every paper trail of my involvement had been wiped clean. It was as if I had stopped working there 14 days before they actually fired me. They were not just firing me, they were erasing me from the timeline. I reached into my bag and pulled out the external hard drive I kept on my keychain. It was a violation of company policy, but right now, it was my lifeline. I plugged it in and scanned the backup files I had saved the night before. I found a recording from a strategy review. I had turned on the dictation software to catch the minutes, but I had forgotten to turn it off when I left the room to take a call. I put my headphones on and pressed play. The room noise was low, just the hum of the air conditioner. Then, I heard the door click shut, marking my exit. A moment later, Graham's voice cut through the static, clear and terrifyingly casual. "Do not worry about the risk report," he said. "I will overwrite the file tonight. Just let her think it is on her. When she panics, she gets sloppy." I ripped the headphones off. My hands were shaking. He had not just capitalized on my failure, he had engineered it. I clicked on the metadata of the master strategy file attached to an old email draft. I scrolled down to the modification history. There it was. The author field had been changed from Tessa Calloway to Graham Whitlock. The timestamp was 2:13 in the morning, 3 days ago, while I was sleeping next to him, believing we were a team. He was downstairs, stealing my work and putting his name on the cover. I needed confirmation. I grabbed my phone and texted Lena Brooks, my closest ally in the analytics department. "Lena, something is wrong. They wiped my calendar. Did you see the risk report for Hush?" The 3 dots appeared immediately, then vanished, then appeared again. Finally, a message popped up. "Don't text me again," Lena wrote. "They are watching the internal logs. I can't help you. Tessa. I'm sorry." She followed it with a single emoji, a face with a zippered mouth. Then she blocked me. I set the phone down. This was not just about getting fired. This was a purge. They needed me gone before Project Hush went public so that when the fake numbers blew up, or when the success came flooding in, I would be nowhere near the blast radius. I picked up the termination paperwork they had shoved at me. I skipped the boilerplate text and went straight to the non-disclosure agreement. It was aggressive. It stated that if I signed within 48 hours, I would receive a small payout. But the clause at the bottom made my blood run cold. Failure to execute this agreement within the designated time frame grants Vantage Quill partners the right to publicly disclose the internal disciplinary reasons for termination. It was blackmail. Sign and take the hush money, or refuse and watch them destroy my reputation with whatever fabricated disciplinary reasons Graham had planted in my file. I looked at the laptop screen, then at the sleeping house around me. They thought they had cornered me. They thought that by locking my email and wiping my calendar, they had destroyed the truth. But they forgot that I was old-fashioned. I walked over to our home printer and pulled out a fresh ream of paper. I did not sign the electronic document. Instead, I hit print on the backup files. I printed the metadata logs. I printed the original risk reports. I printed the transcript of the recording. The rhythmic whir clunk of the printer was the only sound in the room. Data can be deleted, passwords can be changed, but paper is physical. Paper is heavy, and by the time the sun came up, I was going to have a mountain of it. The house began to feel less like a home and more like a theater production where everyone knew their lines except me. Graham was putting on the performance of a lifetime. He invited our friends over for casual drinks, but the air was thick with rehearsed pity. I stood in the kitchen, cutting limes for gin and tonics, listening to his voice carry from the living room. It is a pride thing. Mostly. Graham was saying, his voice lowered to a confidential whisper. She is having a total breakdown about it. She can't accept that the industry has moved on. I am just trying to keep her away from sharp objects. Figuratively speaking, I gripped the knife handle tight, watching my knuckles turn white. When I walked out with the tray, the conversation died instantly. Our friends, people I had known for 5 years, looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and fear, as if failure was a contagious disease. Then came Celeste. She arrived the next morning with a brigade of 3 other society wives, carrying casseroles like they were attending a funeral. They sat in my living room, sipping tea and dissecting my career corpse. "Tessa, dear," Celeste said, placing a manicured hand on my knee. "We are all family here. You can be honest. Are you sure you didn't do something? Inadvertently, big firms like VantageQuill don't just fire competent people without cause. Did you mismanage a fund? I did not mismanage anything." "Celeste," I said, keeping my voice steady. She exchanged a look with the woman next to her. "Of course not. But sometimes, when we are stressed, we make mistakes we don't even remember. Denial is the first stage of grief, isn't it?" I had to get out of the room. I retreated to the home office, the one room where I felt in control. But the door was locked. I rattled the handle. Graham appeared at the top of the stairs. "I need the space. Tess, I have a call with the investors in 10 minutes. It is my office, too." "Graham," I said, "my files are in there." "Not anymore," he replied coldly. "I need a sterile environment. You are a liability right now. I can't have you walking in and out while I am discussing serious capital." He unlocked the door, slipped inside, and clicked the lock shut again. I stood there, humiliated in my own hallway, but I did not leave. I pressed my ear against the wood. The walls were thick, but the vent above the door carried sound perfectly. "No, do not worry about that." Graham's voice floated through. "She is out. Access revoked. There is no risk of a leak anymore. I made sure she feels unstable. She won't talk. She is too busy doubting her own sanity." My blood ran cold. He was selling my silence as a feature of his promotion. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting another sympathetic text from a friend who thought I was crazy. Instead, it was an email from an encrypted service. No subject line. "If you want to know why you were pushed out, look at the CEO meeting schedule for this week." I stared at the screen. Was this a lifeline, or was it another trap to see if I was still digging? I didn't reply. I just memorized the advice. That evening, the atmosphere shifted from suffocating to legalistic. Graham found me on the patio and slid a document across the glass table. It was heavy, bound in blue paper. "What is this?" I asked. "It is a post-nuptial amendment," he said, pouring himself a drink. "My mother's lawyers drafted it. It just separates our liabilities. Since you are unemployed and facing potential disciplinary marks on your record, it protects the family assets. It is just a formality to avoid trouble. Sign it, and I can probably get them to increase your severance." I looked at the paper. It wasn't protection, it was a robbery. It essentially stated that any future earnings or legal settlements I acquired were mine alone. But I waived all claims to the Whitlock Family Trust and Graham's current equity. "I need to read it," I said, feigning exhaustion. "Just sign it. Tessa, don't be difficult. I am trying to help you." I said I need to read it. I took the document upstairs. I did not read it. I photographed every single page and sent the images to a secure server for the independent lawyer I had contacted 2 hours ago. Then I walked back downstairs. Graham was standing by the window, watching his reflection. I stopped in the doorway. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. There was only a cold, hard curiosity left. "Graham," I said. He turned, looking annoyed. "Did you sign it? I have one question," I said, my voice dead calm. "How long did you know what? That I was going to be fired? How long did you know before it happened?" He looked at me. For a second, his mask slipped. He didn't look worried or guilty. He looked bored. He didn't answer. He just took a sip of his drink and turned back to the window, leaving the silence to answer for him. It was exactly 14 days since I had been erased from my own life. I was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by silence. When my burner phone buzzed, it was a single text message from a number that did not exist in any public directory. 7:30 tonight, 19th floor conference room, Graymore Hotel, secret CEO meeting, come alone. I stared at the screen. Below the text was a complex digital code, a QR pass that looked more like military encryption than a hotel key. Then came the final line, the hook that dragged me up from the floor. If you want your name back, come. I went to my laptop and pulled up the city map. The Graymore Hotel was real, a monolith of glass and steel in downtown Ridgeport. I cross-referenced the date with the public records I had scraped before my access was cut. Tonight was the Vantage Quill Investor Gala, but the gala was in the ballroom on the first floor. The 19th floor was executive territory. It was a ghost floor. I looked at the clock. It was 6 p.m. Graham was still at the club playing squash. Or at least that was what his shared calendar said. I looked at my primary smartphone sitting on the counter. I knew he was tracking it. I knew he checked the location logs every night, telling me it was for my safety, but I knew it was to make sure his liability stayed put. I plugged my primary phone into the kitchen charger. It would stay there all night, broadcasting a lie to my husband that I was safe at home, probably crying in the dark. I took the cheap prepaid phone I had bought with cash 3 days ago and slipped it into my pocket. I dialed the number of the independent attorney I had met in a diner 2 towns over. She answered on the first ring. I got a location, I said. You can go, she told me, her voice sharp and pragmatic. But you must have an exit strategy. If you are not out in 2 hours, I call the police. Do not trust anyone in that room. Tessa. I hung up and opened a draft email in an old account I used to share with Lena for lunch orders. I typed out a grocery list, but the quantities were codes we had jokingly invented years ago during boring meetings. 19 apples, 7:30 pickup, Graymore brand. If I went missing, Lena would be the only one who could decode the last place I was seen. Then I remembered the photo I had taken of the envelope on the counter. I pulled up the image of Graham's VIP pass. I zoomed in on the fine print at the bottom of the invitation. There it was. Private dinner CEO and board. 1900 hours. The timeline matched perfectly. My anonymous source was not lying. Graham was going to be there. They were all going to be there. I went upstairs to dress. I chose black slacks and a navy blouse. Nothing that would catch the light. Nothing that could be grabbed in a struggle. I taped the flat USB drive containing the metadata logs to the inside of my left ankle. I folded the printed transcript of Graham's betrayal and tucked it into the lining of my blazer. Finally, I took a small digital voice recorder, pressed the record button, and slipped it into my breast pocket. The house was quiet as I walked to the kitchen. I took a piece of paper and a pen. I did not write an apology. I did not write an explanation. I wrote 5 words. I am going out. Don't wait. I left it right next to my decoy phone. Let him come home and find it. Let him panic. Let him wonder if the wife he thought he had broken was finally snapping back. The cab dropped me a block away from the Graymore. The rain was falling hard, washing the city in gray and silver. I walked through the service entrance, avoiding the paparazzi out front for the gala. I approached the service elevator and held my phone up to the scanner. The QR code flashed green. The button for the 19th floor lit up automatically. The elevator rose swiftly. My ears popped. I watched the numbers climb, counting every heartbeat. When the doors slid open, I expected noise. I expected the clink of glasses or the hum of conversation. Instead, the hallway was silent as a tomb. The carpet was thick and plush, absorbing the sound of my footsteps. At the far end of the corridor, standing in front of double mahogany doors, were 2 men in dark suits. They were built like walls. They did not ask for my ID. They did not move to intercept me. They just watched me approach, their eyes locking onto mine with a recognition that made the hair on my arms stand up. They had been told I was coming. The heavy mahogany doors swung open, and the air inside the conference room hit me like a physical weight. It was colder here than in the hallway. Marcus Hale sat at the head of the table, looking 10 years older than his official headshot. To his right sat Evelyn Shaw, a board member known for her ruthlessness, and to his left was a lawyer I recognized only as the company hatchet man. They did not offer me a seat. I did not ask for one. I walked to the opposite end of the table and stood there, gripping my folder until my knuckles ached. "Ms. Calloway," Marcus said. His voice was not angry. It was exhausted. "You are here because we have a problem. And frankly, you are the only variable we cannot account for." "I am not a variable." "Marcus," I said, "I am the collateral damage." Marcus leaned forward, clasping his hands. "You were not fired for incompetence. Tessa, you know that. You were fired because someone needed you to disappear before we signed a deal that is currently threatening to destroy this entire firm." I looked at him, keeping my face blank. I assumed as much. Graham needed the lane clear. The lawyer scoffed, sliding a tablet across the polished wood toward me. "It is not just about clearing a lane. It is about liability. Look at the screen." I looked down. On the glowing display was an internal security report. It was dated 3 days before my termination. The header read "Unauthorized Data Exfiltration. Suspect Tessa Calloway." My stomach dropped. They hadn't just fired me. They had built a frame to hang me with. "Graham told us you were selling proprietary risk models to our competitors," Marcus said quietly. "He said you were bitter about your stagnation. He provided logs showing the files leaving your terminal." I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat, dark and hysterical, but I swallowed it down. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my own stack of papers. I slapped them onto the table. The sound cracked like a gunshot in the silent room. "I did not come here to beg for my job back," I said, my voice rising just enough to cut the air. "I came to tell you the truth. And the truth is that your security report is a lie." I flipped the folder open. I pointed to the highlighted lines on the top page. "Look at the metadata," I commanded. "The files did not leave my terminal during work hours. They were modified and exported at 2:13 in the morning. Look at the IP address. That is not a VPN. That is the residential IP for the Whitlock household. And at 2:13 in the morning, I was asleep. Graham, however, was logged into the master server using my credentials. He did not catch a leak. Marcus. He created one." Marcus picked up the paper. His eyes scanned the lines, widening as he processed the technical reality. He looked up at Evelyn. "He told us she was selling them," Marcus whispered. "No," I corrected him. "I was not selling them. I was the product. I was being sold as the scapegoat." Evelyn Shaw went pale. She reached into her purse and pulled out a printed email. Her hand was shaking slightly. "We received an anonymous tip 2 weeks ago," Evelyn said, her voice thin. "It suggested we terminate you immediately to avoid a public scandal. It said you were mentally unstable and vindictive. We thought we were protecting the merger. You were not protecting anything." I said, "You were being played." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small digital recorder. I pressed play. The static hissed for a second, and then Graham's voice filled the boardroom, arrogant and undeniable. "Do not worry about the risk report. I will overwrite the file tonight. Just let her think it is on her. When she panics, she gets sloppy." I clicked the stop button. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of power shifting. The lawyer stopped looking at his tablet. Evelyn looked like she was going to be sick. Marcus Hale slowly took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Graham had painted me as a liability, but in this room, with this evidence, He had just become the single point of failure for the entire company. Marcus looked up at me. The exhaustion was gone from his eyes, replaced by a sharp, predatory focus. He was a survivor, and he just realized I had given him a life raft. If this goes public, the deal dies, and the stock tanks, Marcus said, thinking aloud. Graham has rigged the numbers on Project Hush. Hasn't he? He has. I confirmed, and he used my termination to hide the edits. Marcus stood up. He walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked city, then turned back to face me. He didn't look at me like an employee anymore. He looked at me like a partner. We have the investor gala downstairs right now, Marcus said. Graham is down there, shaking hands, thinking he has won. He thinks you are at home crying over a severance check. He does, I said. Marcus walked back to the table and leaned in close. Then let's correct that assumption, he said. If you help us flip this investigation right now, tonight, if you help us bury him with his own lies, we will bring you back. But not to your old desk, if we survive this night. Tessa, you are not coming back as staff. You are coming back to the decision table. I looked at the men who had fired me 2 weeks ago. I looked at the evidence of my husband's betrayal spread across the mahogany. I don't want a seat at the table. Marcus, I said softly. I want to clear the whole table. Marcus smiled, a cold, sharp expression. Then let's go downstairs. Before we proceed, I said, my voice cutting through the tension, I have conditions. Marcus nodded, his face pale in the harsh light of the projector. Name them. Every word spoken from this moment on is recorded, I said, pulling up the secure link on my burner laptop. My lawyer joins via encrypted channel, and no one, absolutely no one, contacts Graham until the trap snaps shut. If his phone buzzes, I walk, and I take the evidence to the SEC. They agreed without hesitation. Within minutes, the conference room transformed into a war room. We bypassed the standard IT protocols and set up a direct line to the server core. I typed in the command strings myself, my fingers flying over the keyboard with a muscle memory I thought I had lost. I was not looking for risk models anymore. I was looking for the money. Look at this, I said, pointing to the flowchart on the screen. Project Hush isn't a merger. It is a liquidation disguised as a partnership. Evelyn leaned in, her eyes widening behind her glasses. What are you talking about? Graham isn't bringing capital in, I explained, tracing the red lines of the transaction. He is moving our intellectual property out. See these transfer protocols. Once the deal signs, the patents for our algorithm transfer to a holding company in the Caymans. VantageQuil is left with the debt, and the new entity walks away with the brain. He is gutting us. The silence in the room was heavy. They realized they were moments away from signing their own death warrants. We stop the gala, the lawyer said, reaching for his phone. We arrest him now. No, I said sharply. If you stop it now, he claims it is a technical error. He spins it. He survives. We need to let him walk into the fire. What do you propose? Marcus asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. Let him take the stage, I said. Let him announce the deal. Let him take full credit. And the moment he asks for the final validation code, we trigger the live audit, publicly. Just then, the service door opened. I tensed, expecting security, but it was Lena. She was soaking wet from the rain, clutching a leather briefcase to her chest. She looked terrified, but she walked straight to me. I brought it, Lena said, her voice shaking. I'm sorry I blocked you, Tessa. I had to make them think I was loyal. You sent the text, I realized, feeling a rare flash of warmth. And this, she said, sliding a stack of printed emails across the table. I pulled these from the HR archives before they scrubbed them. It is Celeste. She didn't just ask for your termination. She authorized a reputation management budget to plant fake disciplinary records in your file. I looked at the emails. Erase her traces. Celeste had written, make her look unstable so no one believes her. This is criminal, Marcus whispered. It is leverage, I corrected him. I want the announcement live-streamed, not just to the investors, but to the internal network. I want every employee to see exactly why the numbers change. That is brutal, Evelyn said, though she was already typing the authorization. It will ruin him. It is necessary, I replied. You want to save the company? You have to cut out the infection, and you have to do it while the world is watching, so he can't lie his way out of it. Marcus looked at me, and for the first time, I saw shame in his eyes. He slumped in his chair. Tessa, he said quietly, you have to understand. The Whitlock faction. They control 40% of the board. They told me if I didn't fire you, they would call a vote of no confidence. I was trying to save my own neck. I looked at him. A week ago, that admission would have broken my heart. Now, it was just another data point to be filed away. Then tonight isn't just justice for me. Marcus, I said, my voice cold and steady. It is your chance to prove you actually deserve to sit in that chair. I turned away from them and walked to the door that led to the mezzanine balcony. I opened it slightly and looked down into the glittering ballroom below. The crystal chandeliers were bright. The champagne was flowing. And there, in the center of the circle, was Graham. He was shaking hands with a major investor, throwing his head back in that fake, charming laugh I used to love. He looked like a king. I watched him, and I waited for the anger to come. But it didn't. There was no pain. There was no sadness. There was only the calm, rhythmic ticking of a clock that was about to strike midnight. Enjoy the drink, Graham, I whispered to the glass. It is the last one you will ever taste in this town. The ballroom was suffocatingly warm, smelling of expensive perfume and desperation. Graham stood on the raised platform, bathed in the spotlight. He looked perfect. His tie was straight, his smile was bright, and he was lying through his teeth to 300 people. When I conceptualized the hush protocol, Graham said, gripping the podium with both hands, I knew it required a vision that only I could provide. It was not just about numbers. It was about instinct. I saw the future of this market before the data even existed. He emphasized the word I every time. There was no team. There was no Vantage Quill. There was only Graham Whitlock, the solitary genius. I stood at the very edge of the room, near the catering entrance. I wore no jewelry. My makeup was minimal. I was not there to dazzle. I was there to witness. Celeste was sitting in the front row, wearing a silver gown that cost more than my first car. She turned slightly, scanning the room as if checking for threats. Her eyes locked onto mine. For a second, her smile faltered. Then, it returned, sharper than before. She tilted her head, a silent message sent across the crowded floor. You are deleted. Go home. She thought I was crashing the party. She did not know I was the event planner. Marcus Hale stepped onto the stage. He was supposed to shake Graham's hand and initiate the champagne toast. Graham extended his hand, expecting the victory lap, but Marcus did not take it. He walked past Graham and adjusted the microphone. Thank you, Graham, Marcus said, his voice echoing slightly. But before we sign the final accords tonight, the board has decided to introduce a new element to our company culture: total transparency. We believe our investors deserve to see exactly how this deal was built. The room went quiet. Graham's smile froze. He laughed. A nervous, hacking sound. Marcus, Graham said, stepping closer to the mic, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that the amplifier still caught. What are you doing? This isn't the script. The script has changed, Marcus replied flatly. Graham looked out at the audience, his eyes darting frantically until they landed on me again. His face twisted. He pointed a finger straight at me, abandoning all pretense of professionalism. Is this about her? Graham sneered into the microphone, his voice booming. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize. It seems my ex-wife has trouble accepting reality. She is clearly unwell. Some people just cannot let the past sleep. They have to drag everyone down into their misery." The crowd murmured, turning to look at me. Hundreds of eyes judged the woman standing alone in the shadows. I did not flinch. I did not shout back. I simply pulled my phone from my pocket and sent a single text to Evelyn Shaw in the control booth. "Turn on the screen. The 213 version. Behind Graham, the massive projection screen that displayed the company logo flickered. Then it went black. A second later, it illuminated with a stark, white interface. It was a digital timeline. "What is this?" Graham demanded, turning around. "Turn it off. Look at the timestamp." "Graham," I whispered to myself. On the screen, a file name appeared. "Project Hush, Risk Strategy, Final." Beside it, a red line highlighted the modification history. The text was large enough for the back row to read. Original author Tessa Calloway. Modified by Administrator Override. Time 2:13 in the morning. Location Whitlock Residence. Master bedroom. A gasp rippled through the room. It sounded like the air being sucked out of a vacuum. Then, another document appeared. It was a bank transfer log. Bonus payout. Recipient Graham Whitlock. Reason IP transfer. "This is a fabrication," Graham shouted, his voice cracking. "She hacked the system. She is trying to frame me." Suddenly, a chair scraped loudly against the floor. Lena Brooks stood up in the middle of the room. She was shaking, but her voice was clear. "It is not a hack," Lena said. She did not have a microphone, but in the deadly silence, she did not need one. Tessa wrote every word of that strategy. I watched the logs. I watched them delete her name week by week. I have the original emails. Graham looked like he had been punched in the gut. He backed away from the podium, looking for an ally. He looked at his mother. Celeste stood up. Her face was contorted with a fury I had never seen. She did not look at Graham. She looked at the screen that was destroying her legacy. She lunged toward the stairs of the stage, her hand reaching out as if she could physically rip the images down. "Stop this," Celeste shrieked. "Turn it off, I command you to." Two large security guards stepped in front of her. They did not bow. They did not apologize. They simply blocked her path with their chests, arms crossed. "I am afraid that is not possible." "Mrs. Whitlock," Marcus said from the stage, "this is a board-sanctioned audit." The murmurs in the room swelled into a roar. The investors were pulling out their phones. The flash of cameras started to pop, not for the celebration, but for the crime scene. Graham stood alone center stage, stripped of his narrative, while I watched from the dark, breathing steadily for the first time in weeks. The ballroom had transformed into a live tribunal. The screen behind Graham was no longer just displaying file names. It was streaming a real-time audit of the family finances. Lines of code scrolled rapidly, settling on a series of transactions that made the room gasp collectively. "What we are looking at," Marcus said, his voice amplified and booming through the speakers, "is a series of unauthorized transfers from the Whitlock Family Trust to a shell corporation registered in Panama. A corporation that, coincidentally, holds a short position against Vantage Quill stock." Graham stood frozen. The color had drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under the stage lights. That is an investment strategy," Graham stammered, his hands gripping the podium until his knuckles turned white. "It is a hedge. Standard practice. It is betting against your own company," Marcus corrected him. "But here is the part that interests me more." The screen shifted again. A large email window appeared. It was the anonymous tip that had destroyed my career 2 weeks ago, the one that claimed I was mentally unstable. "We traced the origin of the smear campaign," Marcus announced. The device MAC address belongs to a tablet registered to Celeste Whitlock. Heads snapped toward the front row. Celeste sat rigid, her face a mask of horrified indignity. But Marcus wasn't finished. However, Marcus continued, the traffic was routed through a corporate VPN to mask the location. A VPN that requires biometric authentication. Yours, Graham. The implication hit the room like a physical blow. The mother had written the lie, and the son had built the tunnel to deliver it. They had conspired to destroy his wife to save their portfolio. I was framed. Graham shouted, his voice cracking into a desperate squeal. Someone stole my login. It is a setup. She did it. He pointed a trembling finger at me. The system logs show a retina scan verification at the time of transmission. The head of IT spoke up from the side of the stage. You cannot fake a retina scan. Mr. Whitlock. Graham's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The trap was absolute. I stepped out of the shadows. I walked past the stunned security guards and climbed the 3 steps to the stage. Graham shrank back as I approached, as if he expected me to hit him. I did not even look at him. I walked straight to the microphone he had just used to mock me. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the projector. I do not need you to believe me, I said into the mic. My voice was level, devoid of tears, devoid of the hysteria they had accused me of. I only need you to look at the data. The data does not have an ego. The data does not have a family name to protect. I held up 3 fingers. Point 1, I said, I wrote the strategy to save this company. Point 2, I lowered a finger. Graham Whitlock changed the author name at 2:13 in the morning to save his career. Point 3, I lowered the final finger, leaving my hand in a fist. If you had signed his deal tonight, the intellectual property would have vanished, and you would all be holding shares in an empty shell. That is the price of my silence. Is it affordable? I stepped back. Marcus walked to the center of the stage. He looked at Graham with the cold detachment of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. Graham Whitlock, Marcus said formally. Effective immediately. You are suspended from all executive duties pending a federal investigation into corporate fraud and insider trading. Security. Please escort him out. 2 guards stepped forward. Graham looked at them. Then he looked at the crowd. The admiration he had fed on for years had vanished. In its place was a sea of disgusted faces. And Mrs. Whitlock, Marcus added, looking down at the front row. Please remove her as well. She is a person of interest in an active internal investigation. Celeste stood up, trying to muster some dignity, but the crowd parted away from her as if she were contagious. As the guards guided Graham past me, he stopped. He looked me in the eyes. For the first time in our marriage, I did not see the arrogant executive or the charming husband. I saw a terrified child realizing the lights were about to go out. Tess, he whispered, his voice shaking. Please. I can fix this. He realized then. I think. He realized I was not the woman he had left crying in the kitchen. I was the one who had locked the door. I didn't answer him. I just watched him be led away. The crowd began to whisper my name. Tessa Calloway. It rippled through the room. It wasn't the pitying tone from the funeral-like gatherings at my house. It was a sound mixed with fear and respect. They realized I had burned a dynasty to the ground without striking a match. I turned to leave, my work done, but Evelyn Shaw intercepted me at the bottom of the stairs. Her face was grave. Tessa. Wait, Evelyn said, grabbing my arm. I am done. Evelyn, I said, I gave you the truth. Now I am going home. You can't go home, she said, lowering her voice. We just held an emergency vote in the green room while you were speaking. The board is unanimous. The stock is going to freefall when the market opens tomorrow unless we have a stabilizer. I looked at her, confused. What are you saying? We need an interim CEO immediately, Evelyn said, staring straight into my eyes. "Tonight. And we have already cast the votes." The silence in the private executive suite was heavier than the noise of the ballroom had been. The board members sat around the circular table, looking at me not as a former employee, but as their only lifeline. The stock market would open in 7 hours, and without a narrative shift, Vantage Quill would be trading for pennies by lunch. "It is binary." "Tessa," Evelyn Shaw said, leaning forward. "Either you accept the role of interim CEO to stabilize the market and clean out the corruption, or we collapse under the weight of the lawsuits Graham just invited. We need a face that screams integrity. Right now, that face is yours." I looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. It was a seat I had never coveted, but one that was now being thrust upon me. "I do not want a hollow title," I said, my voice steady. "If I take this, I am not just keeping the seat warm. We rewrite the corporate charter. We implement a transparency protocol that tracks every file modification. We create a whistleblower protection fund that actually works. And we remove the ability for any executive to override a risk assessment solo. If you want me to save this ship, I am going to rebuild the engine." Marcus Hale nodded immediately. "Agreed. You have full autonomy." My independent lawyer, who had been listening on the secure line, spoke up from the speakerphone. "There is also the matter of the post-nuptial agreement Mr. Whitlock attempted to coerce Mrs. Whitlock into signing. It is void," the lawyer continued, his voice crisp. "Since Graham failed to disclose the assets in the Panama Shell Company, he committed fraud during the drafting of the contract. He has no claim to Tessa's assets, but because the Shell Company was funded with marital capital, she has a claim to everything he tried to hide. It was the final legal checkmate. Graham had tried to ring-fence me out of his fortune, but in doing so, he had handed me the keys to his vault." I walked out into the corridor. The police were already there. They were escorting Graham toward the service elevator, the same one I had used to sneak in. He looked stripped of his armor. His tie was undone, and his face was pale. When he saw me, he stopped. He tried to summon his old charm, but it looked like a cracked mask. "Tess," he stammered, his eyes wet. "I did it for us. You have to know that. I wanted to build an empire for our family." I stopped. I did not scream. I did not cry. I looked at him with the detachment of a stranger. "You laughed when they erased my name." "Graham," I said softly. "You stood there and smiled while they turned me into a ghost. Now you live with your name. I hope it keeps you warm." I walked past him and did not look back. Downstairs. The fallout for Celeste was swift and brutal. She was standing near the cloakroom, trying to rally a few of her socialite friends, but they turned their backs on her as she approached. The social currency she had hoarded for decades had devalued to zero in a single night. She tried to grab the arm of a reporter, ready to whisper one last lie about my mental state, but Lena Brooks was faster. She tapped a button on her tablet, and a notification pinged on every company phone and media device in the lobby. It was the internal release of the Erase Tessa emails, showing Celeste's direct orders to fabricate my disciplinary records. The reporter looked at his phone, then looked at Celeste with pure disgust and walked away. She was left standing alone in the middle of the crowd, invisible for the first time in her life. An hour later, the board voted officially. I was named interim CEO of Vantage Quill Partners. Marcus Hale stood by my side as we issued the press release, publicly apologizing for the systemic failure that had led to my termination. But the moment that mattered most wasn't the press conference. It was when I ordered the IT director to restore the original metadata for Project Hush. I watched the screen as the system refreshed. The name Graham Whitlock disappeared from the author field. In its place, clear and permanent, appeared Tessa Calloway. It wasn't revenge. It was a correction. I stood alone in the CEO's office as the sun began to rise over Ridgeport. I looked at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass. I looked different than the woman who had stood in her kitchen 2 weeks ago, holding a severance letter and feeling like trash. I touched the cold glass, watching the city wake up below me. The secret CEO meeting didn't just change my life. I whispered to the silence. It returned the truth to the right person. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below with your city or country. It is amazing to connect with all of you. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Victoria Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.